The September sun hung low over Route 9, casting long shadows across the gravel parking lot of Millie's Diner in southern Idaho. The air smelled of diesel fuel mixed with fried onions, the kind of scent that clings to truck stops and small-town diners, where the coffee is always hot and the faces rarely change. A breeze moved through the lot, storing up dust and the faint metallic tang of rust. Tommy Reese stood near the edge of the pavement, hands stuffed into the pockets of a jacket 2 sizes too large. He was 9 years old, thin in the way kids get when growth spurts come faster than grocery money. His sneakers were held together with duct tape, and his jeans had been hemmed by hand, the stitching uneven but careful. He watched the old man struggling beside the motorcycle, his breath coming in short, labored pulls. The man was maybe 75, 76. His hands shook as he tried to wipe rust from the chrome of a 1987 Harley-Davidson Softail. The bike had seen better years. The leather seat was cracked, the paint faded, but someone had loved it once. An oxygen tank sat strapped to the saddlebag, the clear tube looping up to rest beneath the man's nose. His name was Earl Donovan, though Tommy didn't know that yet. Earl coughed, a deep rattling sound, and steadied himself against the handlebars. The rag in his hand fell to the ground. He bent to retrieve it, then thought better of it and stayed upright, breathing hard. Tommy stepped forward. "Mister," he said quietly, "you need help?" Earl turned his head slowly. His eyes were pale blue, watery at the edges, and they studied the boy for a long moment. "I'm fine, son. You dropped your rag." Earl glanced down, then back at Tommy. He didn't say anything. Tommy picked up the rag, shook the dust off, and held it out. Earl took it, but didn't move to use it. Tommy looked at the bike, then at the old man, then back at the bike. "My dad taught me how to clean bikes before he left," Tommy said. "I could help, if you want." Earl's jaw tightened. He looked away, toward the horizon, where the road stretched out between farmland and forest. Then he nodded once. "All right." Tommy set to work. He found an old sponge near the diner's side door and filled a bucket with soapy water from the outside faucet. He wiped down the chrome with slow, deliberate strokes, checking the pressure, making sure not to scratch the metal. He cleaned the spokes, the exhaust pipes, the leather seat. Earl watched in silence, his expression unreadable. The boy worked for 20 minutes without speaking. When he finished, the bike gleamed in the fading light. Tommy stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans. "That's better," he said. Earl's eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it. "What's your name?" "Tommy Reese. You live around here?" "Trailer park off Miller Road. My mom works at the truck stop. Double shifts, mostly." Earl nodded slowly. He reached into the pocket of his leather vest and pulled out a worn patch, faded and frayed at the edges. The words Iron Brotherhood MC were stitched across the top, a pair of wings spreading beneath them. He ran his thumb over the fabric like it was something sacred. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago," Earl said quietly. Tommy didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. The rumble of an engine broke the stillness. A lifted pickup truck rolled into the lot, jacked up on oversized tires, exhaust spitting black smoke. 3 men climbed out, all in their mid-30s, wearing Carhartt jackets and boots caked in mud. The one in front was broad-shouldered, with a buzz cut and a smirk that looked permanently fixed to his face. His name was Brad Hollis. "Well, look at this," Brad said, loud enough for the whole lot to hear. Old man Earl still dragging that piece of junk around. The other 2 laughed. One of them, a wiry guy named Cody, kicked at the gravel near the bike. "Thing belongs in a scrapyard." Earl didn't respond. He stood still, one hand resting on the handlebars, the other on the oxygen tank. Brad's eyes shifted to Tommy. "And who's this? You hire yourself a little servant, Earl?" Tommy's hands curled into fists at his sides. But he stayed quiet. Brad walked closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. He looked down at the boy, then at the bike, then back at Earl. "You know, maybe it's time you got yourself into a home. Let the real men handle things around here." The third man, Derek, stepped forward and kicked dirt onto the freshly cleaned chrome. It splattered across the fender, streaking the polished metal. Earl took a step forward, but the oxygen tube pulled taut and he stopped. His breath catching, Brad grinned. "Careful, old man. Don't want you hurting yourself." Tommy moved without thinking. He picked up the rag and started wiping the dirt off the bike again, his jaw tight, his hands stopped. "Ready?" Brad laughed. "Kid's got some loyalty. Too bad it's wasted on a has-been." The three men climbed back into the truck and peeled out of the lot, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. The sound of their laughter faded down the road. Tommy kept cleaning. Earl sat down slowly on the bench beside the diner door, his chest rising and falling with effort. After a moment, he pulled out an old flip phone, the kind with actual buttons. He stared at it for a long time, then opened it and dialed. The line rang twice. "It's Earl," he said, his voice rough. "I need to tell you something before it's too late." He didn't say anything else, just listened, nodded once, and closed the phone. Tommy finished wiping down the bike and stood. Earl looked at him, and for the first time, something like hope flickered in his eyes. "Thank you, son," Earl said. Tommy nodded and turned to walk back toward the road. Behind him, Earl sat in the golden light of the September evening, one hand resting on the phone in his lap, the other on the patch in his pocket. The next morning, Tommy's mother would hear engines. Hundreds of them. 34 years earlier, in the summer of 1989, Earl Donovan stood in front of a cinder block building on the outskirts of Boise. The paint was peeling, the windows barred, and a hand-painted sign above the door read Iron Brotherhood MC. The air smelled like engine oil and cigarette smoke. Inside, a dozen men sat around a long wooden table, their leather vests worn and patched, their faces hard but not unkind. Earl was younger then, his hair still dark, his hands steady. He'd come back from Vietnam 15 years prior and spent most of those years trying to forget what he'd seen. The Brotherhood had given him something to hold on to. A code. A family. That afternoon, they found a kid in the back lot, crouched behind a dumpster, eating a half-rotted sandwich he pulled from the trash. The kid was maybe 16, scrawny, with hollow eyes and clothes that hung off his frame like he'd been shrinking for months. His name was Marcus Holt, though no one knew that yet. One of the members, a man named Grave, grabbed the kid by the collar and dragged him inside. "Caught him stealing food," Grave said, shoving the boy forward. Marcus didn't fight. He just stood there, eyes on the floor, waiting for whatever came next. Earl studied him. The kid's knuckles were scabbed, his face bruised. He'd been on the streets for a while. "What's your name?" Earl asked. The kid didn't answer. "I asked ye a question." "Marcus. You got people, Marcus?" The kid shook his head. Earl looked at the others, then back at Marcus. "You hungry?" Marcus nodded. Earl gestured toward the table. "Sit." The boy hesitated, then sat. Earl brought him a plate of food, leftover burgers and fries from the diner down the road. Marcus ate like he hadn't seen a meal in days, which he probably hadn't. "Where's your family?" Earl asked. "Dead," Marcus said between bites. "Mom overdosed last year. Never knew my dad." Earl nodded slowly. "And you've been on your own since then?" "Yeah." "Stealing to eat?" Marcus stopped chewing, his jaw tight. "I do what I have to." Earl sat down across from him. "I'm not judging you, kid. I'm asking if you want to keep living like this." Marcus didn't answer. "You can stay here," Earl said. "Work for your keep, learn a trade. But you steal from us, you're done. Understand?" Marcus looked up for the first time, his eyes searching Earl's face for the trick, the catch. There wasn't one. "Why?" Marcus asked. "Because someone did it for me once," Earl said. "And because you remind me of myself." Marcus stayed. He slept on a cot in the back room, swept floors, cleaned tools, ran errands. Earl taught him how to work on bikes, how to read an engine, how to rebuild a carburetor from scratch. Slowly, the hollow look in the kid's eyes started to fade. One night, after everyone else had gone home, Marcus sat beside Earl in the garage. They were working on a shovelhead, the kind of bike that required patience and precision. "Why do you do this?" Marcus asked. "Help people like me?" Earl didn't look up from the engine. "Because good people always circle back," he said. "You help someone when they're down, and one day they'll help someone else. That's how it works." Marcus nodded, though he didn't fully understand yet. 6 years later, in 1995, Marcus Holt stood in front of that same cinder block building. He was 22 now, broader in the shoulders, steadier in the eyes. The Brotherhood had voted him in. He was going to be patched. Earl stood before him, holding the vest with the Iron Brotherhood MC patch stitched across the back. The room was silent. Every member present watched as Earl placed the vest on Marcus's shoulders. "This means something," Earl said. "It means your family. It says you stand for something bigger than yourself. And it means when someone needs you, you show up." Marcus looked at him, his throat tight. "I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything," Earl said. "But if you want to pay it forward, help someone who can't help themselves. That's all I ask." Marcus nodded. "Anything you need. Anytime, anywhere." Earl smiled. "I'll hold you to that." The years passed. Marcus rose through the ranks. By the time he was 50, he was president of Iron Brotherhood MC, overseeing 12 chapters across the Pacific Northwest. The club had grown, but the code remained the same. Help those who can't help themselves. Show up when it matters. Earl had retired years earlier, moved to a small town in southern Idaho, lived quietly. They spoke once or twice a year, brief calls, checking in. Marcus always ended the conversation the same way. "You need anything, you call me." Earl always said he was fine, until the day he wasn't. Marcus was in his garage in Boise when the call came in. It was late, nearly midnight. He didn't recognize the number, but he answered anyway. "Chains." Earl's voice was weak, rougher than Marcus remembered. "It's Earl." Marcus straightened. "Earl, you all right?" There was a long pause. Marcus could hear the labored breathing on the other end. "I don't have much time," Earl said. "Lung cancer. Doctor says 6 months, maybe less." Marcus's hand tightened around the phone. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden." Earl coughed, a wet, rattling sound. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "There's a kid here, 9 years old, cleaned my bike yesterday without being asked. Reminds me of you." Marcus listened. "He's got nobody, Chains. His mom works herself to the bone, and there's people in this town who think they can push anyone around. Kid doesn't deserve that." "What do you need?" Marcus asked. "I'm not asking for me," Earl said. "I'm asking for him. Teach him what you taught me. Show him good people still exist." Marcus stared at the photo on the wall, the one of Earl pinning the patch on him 29 years ago. "I'll be there," Marcus said. "Thank you." The line went dead. Marcus sat in the silence of his garage, the weight of the promise settling over him like a second skin. He picked up his phone and opened the encrypted group chat for the club. His fingers moved quickly across the screen. "Church meeting. Tonight. Emergency. This is personal." Within minutes, responses flooded in. "On my way. Be there in 20. What do you need?" Marcus stood, grabbed his vest from the hook on the wall, and pulled it on. He looked at the photo one more time, then walked toward the door. "I'm coming, old man," he said quietly. By 11 that night, the Iron Brotherhood clubhouse in Boise was thick with smoke and the low hum of voices. The building sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by chain-link fence and shadows. Inside, 42 members filled the main room, some leaning against walls, others seated around the long wooden table that had been there since the club's founding. The air smelled like leather, oil, and old coffee. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his hands resting on the scarred wood. He didn't speak right away. He let the silence settle, let them see the weight in his eyes. These men and women knew him well enough to understand that when Marcus called an emergency church meeting at midnight, it wasn't for nothing. "Most of you know Earl Donovan," Marcus began. His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something raw. "He's the reason I'm standing here, the reason a lot of us are." A few heads nodded. Earl's name carried respect in the Brotherhood, even among those who'd never met him. "Earl's dying," Marcus said. "Lung cancer. 6 months if he's lucky." The room went quiet. Yesterday, a 9-year-old kid cleaned Earl's bike without being asked. Kids got no father, a mother working double shifts just to keep a roof over their heads. And there's people in Earl's town who think they can bully anyone they want because nobody's ever told them otherwise. Marcus paused, his jaw tight. "Earl called me. He didn't ask for himself. He asked for the kid. He wants us to show that boy what we showed him, that good people still exist, that someone will stand up when it matters." A woman near the back spoke first. Her name was Linda Kowalski, but everyone called her Wrench. She was 47, built solid, with grease-stained hands and a reputation for being able to fix anything with an engine. She'd served as an army engineer in the Gulf War and joined the Brotherhood 10 years ago after her husband died in a construction accident. "Where's the town?" Wrench asked. "Coldwater, southern Idaho. Population under 2,000. A man near the front leaned forward. Darius Webb, 52, known as Preach. He'd been a pastor once, ran a small church in Portland, until the diocese shut him down for speaking out against corruption within the leadership. He wore his collar occasionally still, but mostly he wore his vest. His voice was calm, measured. "What's the play?" Preach asked. "We ride there tomorrow," Marcus said. "Full presence. We don't touch anyone. We don't break laws. We just show up. Let them know Tommy Reese is protected." Another voice came from the left side of the table. Tommy Suarez, 38, called Reaper. He'd been a cop in Sacramento for 12 years before he quit after witnessing fellow officers cover up an excessive force case. He joined the Brotherhood 3 years ago and brought a sharp legal mind with him. "Brad Hollis and his crew," Reaper said. "They're not just local troublemakers. Brad's uncle is the sheriff, Dale Hollis. He's been running that county like his own kingdom for 15 years. Nobody crosses him." Marcus nodded. "I know." "They'll push back," Reaper continued. "They'll look for any excuse to arrest us, shut us down, make us the bad guys. Then we don't give them one," Marcus said. "We do this clean. Parade permits, liability insurance, federal notification, everything by the book." A younger woman, mid-30s, stood near the window. Evelyn Cross, called Evie. She'd been a combat medic in Iraq, saw 3 tours, came home with PTSD that nearly killed her. The Brotherhood gave her structure, purpose. She was quiet most of the time, but when she spoke, people listened. "If this escalates," Evie said, "someone's going to get hurt. I'll set up a mobile first aid station, just in case." Marcus looked at her and nodded. "Good." Wrench crossed her arms. "How many bikes are we talking?" "I'm sending word to all 12 chapters," Marcus said. "Anyone who can ride, rides." Preach leaned back in his chair. "That's a lot of engines, brother." "It needs to be," Marcus said. "These people need to see that when you come after a kid, you come after all of us." The room was silent for a moment. Then, one by one, the members stood. Wrench was first. "I ride." Preach followed. "I ride." Reaper stood. "I ride." Evie nodded. "I ride." Around the table, every voice joined in, 42 members, one by one, pledging themselves to a cause that had nothing to do with territory or pride. It was about a promise made 34 years ago, about a kid who deserved better, about showing up when the world expected you to stay silent. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the group chat that connected all 12 chapters of Iron Brotherhood MC. His thumbs moved across the screen. "Brothers and sisters, Earl Donovan is calling in the debt. A kid showed him kindness. The wrong people noticed. We ride at dawn. Anyone who can, meet us in Coldwater, Idaho. This is personal." He hit send. Within minutes, the responses came flooding in. Spokane chapter, 87 bikes confirmed. Portland chapter, 114 bikes confirmed. Reno chapter, 68 bikes confirmed. The messages kept coming. Tacoma, Bozeman, Bend, Medford, Port Elaine, Eugene, Redding, Sacramento, Fresno. By 1 in the morning, the count was clear. 527 motorcycles, confirmed. Marcus looked at the number on his screen, then looked up at the room. "We leave at 5. Check your bikes. Pack light. Stay legal. And remember why we're doing this." The members dispersed into the night, moving with quiet efficiency. Wrench headed to the garage, where she spent the next 3 hours tuning Marcus's bike. She checked the oil, the brake lines, the clutch cable. Every bolt tightened, every surface wiped clean. She worked in silence, her hands steady, her focus absolute. Reaper made calls. He contacted a friend in the DEA, a Fed he'd worked with years ago, and gave him a heads up. Legal notification, clean operation, no surprises. The Fed promised to monitor from a distance, make sure local law enforcement didn't overstep. Evie packed medical supplies, bandages, antiseptics, splints, pain medication. She loaded everything into saddlebags and a small trailer that could be hitched to her bike. She'd seen enough conflict to know that even the most controlled situations could spiral. Preach sat alone in the chapel, a small room off the main hall where members went when they needed to think. He didn't pray, not in the traditional sense, but he sat in the silence and let himself feel the weight of what they were about to do. He thought about Earl, about the kid, about all the people who'd been stepped on because no one was willing to step up. At 5:17 in the morning, the engines roared to life. The sound was deafening, a rolling thunder that shook the ground and rattled windows half a mile away. Marcus sat at the front, his hands steady on the grips, the American flag mounted on the back of his bike snapping in the wind. Behind him, 526 other motorcycles idled in formation, stretching down the gravel road like a river of chrome and steel. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting the world in shades of orange and gold. Marcus looked back once, saw the faces of his brothers and sisters, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not pride, just purpose. He turned forward, twisted the throttle, and led them onto the highway. They were going to Coldwater, and they weren't coming back until a promise was kept. The ride south through Idaho was unlike anything most drivers on Route 9 had ever seen. 527 motorcycles moving in formation, 2 lanes wide, stretching back nearly half a mile. The sound came first, a distant rumble that grew into a roar, the kind that vibrated through chests and shook rearview mirrors. Cars pulled onto the shoulder. Truckers honked their horns in solidarity. A few people stood on overpasses with phones raised, filming as the river of chrome and leather passed beneath them. Marcus rode at the front, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The wind pulled at his vest, the flag on his bike snapping rhythmically behind him. He didn't think about the attention. He didn't think about what might happen when they arrived. He thought about Earl, sitting on that bench outside the diner, oxygen tank at his side, waiting. State police monitored the procession from a distance, their patrol cars trailing a quarter-mile back. They ran the plates, checked the permits, found everything in order. Reaper had done his job well. There was nothing illegal about 500 people riding motorcycles on a public highway. Nothing they could do except watch. By 2 in the afternoon, the procession reached the outskirts of Coldwater. The town sat in a shallow valley, surrounded by fields and forest, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers were noticed immediately. Population 1,847, according to the faded sign on the edge of town. The sound hit before the bikes did. Windows rattled in their frames. Dogs barked. People stepped out of shops and houses, shading their eyes against the sun, trying to understand what they were hearing. Then the motorcycles appeared, rolling down Main Street in tight formation, engines idling low and steady. Tommy Reese stood outside Millie's diner with his mother, Anna. She was 32, thin and tired in the way people get when they work too much and sleep too little. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, her hands red and chapped from years of washing dishes and cleaning tables. She held Tommy close, her arm around his shoulders, her eyes wide with confusion and something close to fear. Earl sat on the bench near the diner door, his oxygen tank beside him, his hands resting on his knees. He watched the horizon, his expression unreadable. The motorcycles filled the parking lot, forming a perimeter around the diner. They didn't block the entrance, didn't obstruct traffic, just created a presence. Engines idled in unison, a low, steady thrum that felt like a heartbeat. Marcus dismounted first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his vest worn and decorated with patches that told a story only those in the life would understand. He walked directly toward Earl, his boots crunching on the gravel. The two men looked at each other for a long moment, and then Marcus pulled Earl into an embrace, careful of the oxygen tube, his hand resting on the back of the old man's head. Earl's voice was barely a whisper. "You came." Marcus pulled back, his hands still on Earl's shoulders. "Always." Tommy stared, his mouth slightly open. Anna held him tighter, unsure whether to run or stay. Marcus turned toward them, his expression softening. He walked over slowly, then knelt down so he was at Tommy's eye level. "You Tommy?" Marcus asked. The boy nodded. "You cleaned this man's bike yesterday?" Another nod. Marcus's voice was calm, steady. "Then your family, And family protects family. Anna's voice was shaky. Who are you people? Marcus stood, facing her. Friends of Earl's. We're here to make sure nobody bothers you or your boy. Before she could respond, the sound of a truck engine cut through the air. A lifted pickup rolled into the lot, its exhaust spitting black smoke. 3 men climbed out. Brad Hollis led the way, his face flushed, his eyes scanning the sea of motorcycles with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Behind him were Cody and Derek, both looking less confident now. Brad stopped a few feet from Marcus, trying to hold his ground. What the hell is this? Marcus didn't answer right away. He just looked at Brad, his expression neutral. This is harassment, Brad continued, his voice louder now. You can't just. To roll into town like this? A patrol car pulled into the lot, lights flashing. Sheriff Dale Hollis stepped out, his uniform pressed, his badge catching the sunlight. He was 58, heavy around the middle, with a face that had spent years looking down on people. He walked toward Marcus with the kind of swagger that came from decades of unchallenged authority. You boys better have permits for this gathering, the sheriff said, his voice carrying across the lot. Reaper stepped forward from the group, a folder in his hand. He handed it to the sheriff without a word. Dale flipped it open, his jaw tightening as he read. Parade permit, liability insurance, federal notification. Everything filed 12 hours prior. Everything legal. We're here to visit an old friend, Reaper said calmly. That a problem? Dale's eyes flicked to Marcus, then to Earl, then back to the folder. He closed it and handed it back. You stay one day, then you leave. Or I'll find a reason to make you. Marcus's voice was low, steady. We'll leave when we're ready. Brad stepped forward, his fists clenched. This is bullshit. We didn't do nothing. Marcus turned slowly, his gaze locking onto Brad. Nobody said you did. We're just here to visit. Brad's face reddened. You think you can intimidate us? You think this changes anything? He kicked at the ground, sending a spray of gravel toward Tommy. The boy flinched, stepping back into his mother's arms. Instantly, 50 bikers stepped forward. Not running, not shouting, just stepping. A wall of leather and muscle, silent and immovable. The lot went dead quiet. Brad froze, his breath coming faster. Cody and Derek took a step back toward the truck. Even the sheriff hesitated, his hand hovering near his belt. Marcus didn't move. He just stood there, his arms at his sides, his eyes on Brad. You done? Marcus asked. Brad's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at his uncle, but Dale said nothing. Slowly, Brad turned and walked back to the truck. Cody and Derek followed. The engine roared to life, and they pulled out of the lot, tires spitting gravel. The sheriff lingered a moment longer, his eyes scanning the crowd. I'm watching you, he said. Marcus nodded once. We'll be here. Dale climbed back into his patrol car and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. The bikers didn't celebrate. They just returned to their positions, engines still idling, presence still absolute. Marcus walked back to Earl, who was smiling for the first time in months. We're not going anywhere, Marcus said quietly. Earl nodded, his hand reaching out to grip Marcus's forearm. Thank you. Tommy stood beside his mother, his eyes moving from face to face, trying to understand what had just happened. Wrench caught his gaze and gave him a small nod. Evie smiled gently. Preach raised the hand in a quiet wave. Anna looked at Marcus, her voice barely audible. Why are you doing this? Marcus glanced at Earl, then back at her. Because someone did it for us once, and because your boy deserves better than what this town's been giving him. She didn't know what to say, so she just held Tommy closer and let herself believe, for the first time in a long time, that maybe someone was actually going to help. By evening, the diner had become the center of something larger than anyone expected. Bikers filled the lot, some sitting on their bikes, others standing in small groups talking quietly. The tension from the afternoon had settled into something more deliberate. They weren't leaving, and everyone in Coldwater was beginning to understand that. Preach moved through the diner with the ease of someone who'd spent years listening to people who had nowhere else to turn. He ordered coffee, sat at the counter, and let the locals come to him. It didn't take long. A man in his 60s, wearing a feed store cap and work boots, sat down 2 stools over. You folks planning to cause trouble? The man asked. Preach turned his head slowly. No, sir. Just here to make sure a boy and his mother are treated fairly. The man considered that, then nodded. Brad Hollis is a piece of work. His whole family is. Been that way for years. How long? Long as I've been here. 23 years. His uncle runs the county like it's his own personal business. You cross them, things happen. Your shop gets cited for code violations. Your truck gets impounded. Your kids get hassled at school. Preach listened without interrupting. Nobody stands up to them, the man continued. Because nobody can afford to. Preach thanked him and moved on. By the time the sun set, he'd spoken to a dozen people. The stories were consistent. Intimidation. Threats. A system built to protect the powerful and crush anyone who resisted. Outside, Wrench noticed Anna Reese sitting alone on the curb near the diner's side entrance. Her arms wrapped around her knees, her face turned toward the pavement. Wrench approached slowly, then sat down beside her without asking. "You all right?" Wrench asked. Anna didn't look up. "I don't know what's happening. We're just making sure you and your boy are safe." Anna shook her head. "You don't understand. People like Brad, people like the sheriff, they don't forget. When you all leave, we're still here." Wrench was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" Anna nodded. "Those bruises on your wrists, where'd they come from?" Anna's hands instinctively pulled her sleeves down. She didn't answer. "It's all right," Wrench said gently. "You don't have to tell me, but if someone's hurting you, we need to know." Anna's voice broke. "Brad's been coming around for months. Says if I don't do what he wants, he'll get us evicted. Says his uncle can make it happen, and nobody will stop him." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've been working double shifts, trying to save enough to move, but there's never enough. And Tommy, he doesn't know. He thinks everything's fine." Wrench put a hand on her shoulder. "It's going to be fine, I promise." Anna looked at her, wanting to believe but not knowing how. Inside the diner, Reaper sat at a corner booth with his laptop open. He'd been working since they arrived, pulling records, cross-referencing names, following trails that most people wouldn't know to look for. His background as a cop gave him access to databases and contacts that proved useful now. He found property records first. Over the past 10 years, Sheriff Dale Hollis had quietly acquired 15 parcels of land in Coldwater, all purchased for below-market value from families facing financial hardship. 6 months later, those parcels were sold to developers for triple the price. The paper trail was thin, but it was there. Then he found the eviction notices. Anna's trailer park was scheduled for eminent domain seizure in 30 days. The county claimed it needed the land for infrastructure improvements, but the developer listed in the filing was a shell company registered to Dale Hollis's brother-in-law. Reaper made a call. The man on the other end was a federal agent he'd worked with in Sacramento, someone who owed him a favor. "I need you to look into something," Reaper said. "Corruption, civil rights violations, small town, but it's systemic." The agent listened as Reaper laid out what he'd found. When he finished, the agent was silent for a moment. "Send me everything," the agent said. "I'll route it to the field office in Boise. If what you're saying checks out, they'll open an investigation." "How long?" 48 hours to review, maybe 72. "We don't have that long." "Then buy yourselves time." Reaper hung up and kept working. Tommy sat on the bench next to Earl, watching the bikers move around the lot. Earl's breathing was labored, the oxygen tank hissing softly beside him, but he seemed more alive than he had in weeks. "Why did they come?" Tommy asked. Earl looked at him. "Because a long time ago, I helped one of them when nobody else would, and he didn't forget." "That man, Marcus?" Earl nodded. "He was about your age when I met him. Didn't have a family, didn't have a home. I gave him one." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "My dad left when I was little. I don't remember him much." "Sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born into," Earl said. Tommy thought about that. Then he asked, "Are you scared of dying?" Earl smiled faintly. "A little, but not as much as I used to be. I think I'm more scared of leaving things unfinished." "Like what?" "Like making sure you're all right." Tommy looked down at his hands. "I'll be okay. I know you will," Earl said, "because now you've got 500 people who'll make sure of it." As night fell, Rose Kwan, the diner's owner, approached Preach. She was 64, a Vietnamese immigrant who'd owned the diner for 30 years. Her hands shook as she held out a small shoebox. "I need to show you something," she said quietly. Preach took the box and opened it. Inside were receipts, photographs, and letters. The receipts showed payments made to Brad Hollis, labeled as protection fees. The photograph showed broken windows, slashed tires, graffiti. The letters were threats, unsigned but unmistakable. "He's been doing this for 5 years," Rose said. "If I don't pay, something happens. Last time I refused, someone threw a brick through my window. Police said it was vandalism. Couldn't find who did it." Preach's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you report this?" "To who?" "The sheriff's his uncle. The mayor's his cousin. There's nobody to report it to." Preach handed the box to Reaper, who added it to the growing file of evidence. By midnight, the pieces were coming together. FINA. NCA records, witness statements, phonographs, testimony. Reaper compiled everything into a formal complaint and sent it to the FBI field office in Boise. But across town, Brad Hollis sat in his uncle's office, pacing. "They're not leaving," Brad said, "and people are starting to talk." Dale leaned back in his chair, his expression calm. "Let them talk. We'll spin it. Biker gang terrorizes small town. Media eats that up. What if they have evidence?" "Evidence of what? We've been careful." Brad wasn't convinced. "I want them gone." Dale nodded slowly. 48 hours. If they're still here, we make our move." Outside the diner, Marcus stood alone, looking out at the rows of motorcycles. Wrench approached, wiping grease from her hands. "Reaper says the feds are looking into it," she said. "But it'll take time." "We've got time," Marcus said. "Brad's not gonna sit still. You know that." Marcus nodded. "I know. But neither are we." By the second morning, the bikers had transformed the diner parking lot into something between a campsite and a fortress. Tents lined the perimeter. Cooking grills sent smoke into the cool dawn air. And a rotation system ensured that at least 100 members were awake and present at all times. They weren't just visiting anymore. They were establishing presence, making it clear that leaving wasn't on the agenda. Tommy woke early and walked to the lot before his mother could stop him. He found Wrench working on a Sportster, tools spread across a tarp. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. "Morning, kid," she said. "Can I watch?" Tommy asked. Wrench gestured to a spot beside her. "You can do better than watch. Hand me that socket wrench." Tommy knelt down and picked up the tool, placing it carefully in her palm. She showed him how to check the torque on a bolt. Explained the difference between over-tightening and leaving it loose. He listened with the kind of focus most 9-year-olds reserved for video games. Other locals began to notice. A few approached cautiously, bringing coffee and donuts. An older man named Gerald Finch, a retired teacher, walked up to Marcus and extended his hand. "I want to thank you," Gerald said, "for finally standing up to those bastards." Marcus shook his hand. "You just here to help a friend." "You're doing more than that," Gerald replied. "You're showing people it's possible to fight back." By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered. Not everyone was supportive. Some watched from a distance with suspicion, whispering to each other, uncertain whether the bikers were heroes or a different kind of threat. But others, the ones who'd been pushed down for years, saw something else. They saw hope. Rose brought out trays of food, refusing payment. "You eat," she said firmly. "It's the least I can do." A local news van pulled into the lot just before noon. A reporter and cameraman stepped out, the reporter adjusting her blazer and checking her hair in a compact mirror. She approached Marcus with a microphone and a practiced smile. "I'm Kelly Arnett, Channel 7 News. Can I ask you a few questions?" Marcus looked at her, then at the camera. "Go ahead." "Why are you here?" she asked. "A boy showed kindness to a dying man," Marcus said. "The people in power in this town tried to punish him for it. We're here to make sure that doesn't happen." Some locals are calling this intimidation. How do you respond to that? Marcus's expression didn't change. "We haven't touched anyone. We haven't broken any laws. We're just making sure a 9-year-old kid and his mother aren't harassed anymore." If that's intimidation, then the words lost its meaning. The interview aired that evening. Within hours, clips were circulating online. Someone created a hashtag, Iron Brotherhood. It started trending. By nightfall, the story had been picked up by larger outlets. A TikTok video filmed by a teenager showed Brad Hollis trying to confront one of the bikers, shouting and waving his arms. The biker, a man named Cisco, simply stood there with his phone out, recording. "We're not the ones breaking the law, brother," Cisco said calmly in the video. Brad lunged forward, and Cisco sidestepped easily. Brad stumbled, caught himself, then stormed off. The video ended with Cisco turning the camera on himself and saying, "Stay peaceful, stay legal, stay strong." The video hit 2 million views in 6 hours. By morning, it was at 8.3 million. That night, Brad sat in his truck outside the diner, drunk and furious. Cody and Derek were with him, along with 9 others he'd called in, friends and cousins who owed him favors. They all carried baseball bats. "This ends tonight," Brad said, his words slurred. "They think they can embarrass me? Make me look weak?" Cody looked uneasy. "Man, there's like 500 of them. They're not gonna do anything," Brad snapped. "They're all talk. We go in, smash a few bikes, send a message. They'll leave." Derek shook his head. "This is a bad idea." Brad shoved the truck door open. "Then stay here." He walked toward the lot, the others following reluctantly. The bikers saw them coming. No one moved. They just stood, forming a silent line across the entrance, arms crossed, faces neutral. Brad stopped a few feet away, gripping the bat. "You think you're tough? You think this changes anything?" No one answered. Brad swung the bat at the nearest bike, a beautiful custom dyno with flame decals. The bat connected with the fuel tank, leaving a dent. The sound echoed across the lot. Before he could swing again, Marcus stepped forward and caught his wrist, mid-motion. Not violently, just precisely. He twisted Brad's arm, and the bat fell to the ground. "You done?" Marcus asked. Brad tried to pull free, but Marcus's grip was iron. Behind Brad, his friends saw the wall of bikers and slowly backed away. Cody dropped his bat. Derek put his hands up. "Let go of me," Brad hissed. Marcus released him. Brad stumbled back, breathing hard, his face red with rage and humiliation. "Get out of here," Marcus said quietly. "Before you do something you can't take back." Brad looked around. Phones were out. People were recording. He realized too late that he'd just made himself the villain in front of the entire internet. He turned and walked back to his truck, his crew following in silence. The engine roared to life and they drove off, tires screeching. The bikers didn't celebrate. They just returned to their positions. By morning, the video of Marcus disarming Brad was everywhere. News outlets played it on loop. Commentators debated it. The narrative was shifting. The bikers weren't the aggressors. They were protectors. Sheriff Dale Hollis watched the coverage from his office. His hands clenched into fists. His phone rang constantly. The mayor, the county supervisor, reporters, all asking the same questions. "What are you going to do about this? Why haven't you arrested them? Are the corruption allegations true?" Dale made a call, not to his deputies, to someone higher up, someone he'd paid off years ago. "I need this handled," he said. "I don't care how." The voice on the other end was calm. "Give me 24 hours. Dale hung up and stared at the wall. For the first time in 15 years, he felt the ground shifting beneath him. Back at the diner, a woman approached Marcus. Her name was Clara Mendez. She was in her 40s, her hands rough from years of cleaning houses. Her teenage son stood beside her, nervous but resolute. "I need to tell you something," Clara said, "about Brad." Marcus gestured for her to continue. "Last year, Brad assaulted my son, beat him so bad he was in the hospital for 3 days. We tried to report it, but the sheriff said there wasn't enough evidence, said my boy probably started it." Her voice trembled. "We've been scared ever since, too scared to speak up." Marcus looked at Reaper, who stepped forward with a notepad. "Will you testify?" Reaper asked. Clara nodded. "If it means stopping him, yes." Within the hour, 3 more people came forward. A shopkeeper who'd been extorted, a farmer whose land had been taken, a single mother whose son had been harassed by Brad's crew. Each one added their voice to the growing pile of evidence. The dam had broken, and Brad Hollis, along with his uncle, was standing directly in the flood. The third morning arrived with fog hanging low over Coldwater, the kind that muffled sound and made everything feel suspended in time. The bikers were already awake, moving through their routines with quiet efficiency. Coffee brewed on portable stoves, engines were checked, and the perimeter remained secure. They'd been there 72 hours, and nobody was talking about leaving. Brad Hollis hadn't slept. He sat in his truck on a back road outside town, staring at his phone. The videos were still circulating. His face was everywhere, attached to words like bully, coward, corrupt. His friends had stopped answering his calls. Even Cody and Derek had gone silent. He knew what was coming. The feds were involved now. Weeper had made sure of that. Witnesses were talking, records were being pulled, and his uncle's carefully constructed system was collapsing in real time. But Brad wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat quietly. He was the kind who burned everything down on his way out. He made a decision. At 8:30 that morning, Brad drove to the trailer park where Anna and Tommy lived. He parked outside their unit, engine idling, and waited. Anna had already left for her shift at the truck stop. Tommy was inside, getting ready for school. Brad stepped out of the truck and walked to the door. He knocked once, hard enough to rattle the frame. Tommy opened it, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He froze when he saw Brad. "Get in the truck," Brad said. Tommy shook his head, stepping back. Brad grabbed his arm. "I said get in the truck." Tommy tried to pull away, but Brad's grip was too strong. He dragged the boy toward the vehicle, Tommy's feet scraping against the gravel, his voice rising in panic. A neighbor saw it happen. Mrs. Calloway, 72, a widow, who spent most of her time watching the world through her front window. She grabbed her phone and dialed the number Wrench had given to every resident in the park 2 days prior. "He's taking the boy," she said, her voice shaking. Brad Hollis just grabbed Tommy. Wrench answered on the first ring. "Where?" "Trailer park, Unit 47. He's putting him in a truck right now." Wrench was already moving. She shouted across the lot, and within seconds, 20 bikes roared to life. Marcus led the group, his face carved from stone, his hands steady on the grips. They reached the trailer park in under 3 minutes. Brad had Tommy in the passenger seat, the door locked, the boy's fists pounding against the window. Brad climbed into the driver's side and turned the key. The engine started, and he threw it into reverse. The motorcycles blocked the exit. Brad slammed on the brakes, his tires skidding on the gravel. He looked up and saw Marcus standing directly in front of his truck, arms at his sides, unmoving. Behind him, the other bikers formed a wall. Brad honked the horn, screaming through the windshield. "Move!" Marcus didn't move. Brad threw the truck into drive and gunned it, aiming straight for the line of bikes. At the last second, he swerved, trying to go around. Wrench and Evie closed the gap, their motorcycles forming a barrier he couldn't cross. Brad stopped the truck again, breathing hard. He looked at Tommy, who was crying now, his small hands pressed against the glass. Marcus walked to the driver's side window and tapped on it with his knuckles. Brad rolled it down an inch. "Let him go," Marcus said. "Or what?" Brad spat. "You gonna kill me? In front of all these witnesses?" Marcus's voice didn't rise. "I don't need to kill you. You're already done. The FBI's got your uncle. They've got the records, the testimonies, the evidence. It's over. The only question now is how much worse you want to make it." Brad's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "You don't know what you've done. You've ruined everything." "No," Marcus said. "You ruined it. We just made sure people saw." Brad looked at Tommy, then back at Marcus. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not remorse, but the realization that there was no way out. He reached over and unlocked the passenger door. Evie opened it immediately and pulled Tommy out, holding him close. The boy was shaking, his face buried in her shoulder. She carried him away from the truck, toward the safety of the group. Anna arrived moments later, her car screeching to a stop. She ran to Tommy, pulling him from Evie's arms and holding him so tight he could barely breathe. She was crying, her hands running over his face, his arms, checking for injuries. "I'm okay, Mom," Tommy said quietly. "They got here in time." Anna looked at Marcus, her voice breaking. "Thank you." Marcus nodded once. Behind them, the sound of sirens grew louder. But these weren't local patrol cars. They were federal vehicles, dark SUVs with government plates. 4 of them pulled into the trailer park, and agents in jackets marked FBI stepped out. The lead agent was a woman in her 40s, her expression all business. She walked directly to Brad's truck and opened the door. "Brad Hollis, you're under arrest for attempted kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy to commit extortion." She pulled him out of the truck and cuffed him in one smooth motion. Brad didn't resist. He just stared at the ground, his face blank. Another agent approached Sheriff Dale Hollis, who had arrived in his patrol car moments earlier, likely thinking he could still control the situation. The agent didn't give him the chance. "Dale Hollis, you're under arrest for corruption, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations." Dale's face went red. "You can't do this. I'm the sheriff." Not anymore, the agent said, snapping the cuffs into place. The crowd that had gathered, neighbors and locals who'd been watching from a distance, stood in stunned silence. Then someone clapped. Slowly at first, then others joined in. The applause grew, filling the air, a sound of relief and vindication that had been waiting years to be heard. Marcus stood back, arms crossed, watching as Brad and Dale were loaded into separate vehicles. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate, just watched. Reaper walked up beside him. "It's done." Marcus nodded. "For now." Tommy broke away from his mother and ran to Marcus. He wrapped his arms around the man's waist, his face pressed against the leather vest. Marcus hesitated, then placed a hand on the boy's head. "You were brave," Marcus said quietly. "I was scared," Tommy replied. "Brave people are always scared. They just don't let it stop them." Tommy pulled back and looked up at him. "Will you come back? After you leave?" Marcus knelt down so they were eye to eye. "We're not going anywhere until we're sure you're safe. And even after we leave, you've got this." He pulled a small patch from his pocket, the Iron Brotherhood supporter emblem, and handed it to Tommy. "You ever need us, you call. Understand?" Tommy nodded, clutching the patch like it was made of gold. Earl watched from the bench outside the diner, his oxygen tank beside him, his eyes wet. Marcus walked over and sat down beside him. "You kept your promise," Earl said. "So did you," Marcus replied. "You found someone worth saving." Earl smiled, his hand resting on Marcus's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, son." Marcus didn't trust himself to speak. He just sat there, next to the man who'd given him everything, and let the moment settle. Around them, the bikers began to pack up. Not because they were being forced to leave, but because the job was done. The threat was gone. The boy was safe. The system that had crushed this town for 15 years was finally being dismantled. As the sun climbed higher, burning off the fog, Coldwater felt different, lighter. Like a weight had been lifted that people had carried for so long they'd forgotten it was even there. Tommy stood with his mother, watching the bikers prepare to leave. Anna held him close, her hand running through his hair. "They're leaving," Tommy said. "They'll come back if we need them," Anna replied. Tommy looked down at the patch in his hand and believed her. 3 months later, the first snow of the season fell over southern Idaho. It came softly, dusting the fields and roads with white, muffling the world into silence. Route 9 stretched empty in both directions, the kind of quiet that only winter brings to places like Coldwater. Earl Donovan died on a Tuesday morning in early December. He went peacefully, in his sleep. The oxygen tank still hissing softly beside his bed. Anna found him when she came by to check on him, the way she'd been doing every morning since the bikers left. She called Marcus first, before anyone else, because she knew that's what Earl would have wanted. The funeral was held 4 days later. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds that threatened more snow, but never delivered. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the town. Rows of headstones stretching out beneath bare trees. A small chapel stood at the entrance, its white paint peeling, its bells silent. 527 motorcycles filled the parking lot and lined the road for half a mile in both directions. They came from 12 chapters, from cities and towns across the Pacific Northwest, all of them riding through cold and wind to pay their respects to a man most of them had never met. Because Earl mattered to Marcus. And Marcus mattered to them, and that was enough. The service was simple. A pastor from a neighboring town spoke briefly, reading from a prepared text that didn't capture who Earl really was. When he finished, Marcus stood and walked to the front. He didn't carry notes. He just stood there for a moment, looking at the closed casket, draped with an American flag, and then he spoke. "Earl Donovan saved my life when I was 16 years old," Marcus said. His voice was steady, but there was weight behind it. "I was stealing food from his clubhouse, and he could have called the cops, could have let me go back to the streets. But he didn't. He gave me a place to sleep, taught me a trade, and treated me like I mattered. He told me that good people always circle back, that if someone helps you, you help someone else. That's the only code that matters." He paused, his eyes moving across the rows of people, bikers and locals sitting together in the cold. "Earl called me 3 months ago because a 9-year-old boy showed him kindness, and the people in power tried to punish him for it. Earl could have stayed quiet, could have let it go, but he didn't, because that's who he was. He stood up when it mattered, even when he was dying, even when it would have been easier to do nothing. Marcus looked at Tommy, who sat in the front row, between his mother and Wrench. The boy wore a jacket 2 sizes too big. The Iron Brotherhood supporter patch sewn carefully onto the sleeve. Earl taught me that strength isn't about size or power. It's about showing up. He showed up for me. We showed up for him. And now it's on all of us to keep showing up for each other. Marcus stepped back. The chapel was silent except for the sound of people breath. Inging, the shuffle of feet, the quiet clearing of throats. Tommy stood. He walked to the casket, his steps small and uncertain, and placed a single white flower on top of the flag. He stood there for a moment, his hand resting on the wood, and then he whispered something too quiet for anyone else to hear. When the service ended, the bikers formed an honor guard, 2 lines stretching from the chapel to the gravesite. Tommy and Anna walked between them, followed by the rest of the mourners. The casket was carried by 6 members of the Iron Brotherhood, Marcus at the front. They lowered Earl into the ground as the snow began to fall again, soft and silent. A bugler played taps, the notes drifting across the hillside and fading into the gray sky. When it was over, people stayed for a long time, no one quite ready to leave. Life in Coldwater shifted after that. Brad Hollis was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. His uncle Dale got 15. The trailer park seizure was overturned, and the families who lived there were given legal protections that prevented future attempts at displacement. Rose's Diner saw a surge in business after the story went national, and she used the extra income to hire Anna as a manager. Anna took the job and cut back to 1 shift at the truck stop. For the first time in years, she had evenings at home with Tommy. They ate dinner together, talked about his day at school, watched movies on the small television in their living room. The bruises on her wrists faded, and so did the fear in her eyes. Tommy joined a youth mentorship program that Preach started in Coldwater, meeting twice a week in the community center that had been reopened with donations from people who'd followed the story online. Preach taught the kids about responsibility, respect, and standing up for what was right. Tommy listened to every word. On Saturdays, Wrench drove down from Boise and spent the afternoon teaching Tommy how to work on bikes. They'd set up in the driveway of the trailer park, tools spread across a tarp, grease on their hands, the smell of oil and metal in the air. She taught him how to rebuild a carburetor, how to check timing, how to listen to an engine and know what it needed. One Saturday in late February, Wrench pulled a tarp off something in the back of her truck. Underneath was Earl's 1987 Harley-Davidson Softail, fully restored. The chrome gleamed, the leather seat was repaired, the paint touched up and polished. It looked like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. Tommy stared, his mouth open. "It's yours," Wrench said, "when you're old enough to ride it." Attached to the handlebars was a note, written in Earl's shaky handwriting. It was dated 2 weeks before he died. For Tommy, ride it with honor. Tommy ran his hand over the gas tank, his fingers tracing the curves of the metal. He didn't cry, but his eyes were bright. "I will," he said quietly. Marcus visited once a month, always unannounced, always staying just long enough to check in. He'd sit with Anna over coffee, ask how things were going, make sure nobody was giving them trouble. He'd spend time with Tommy, talking about school, about bikes, about life. He never made it feel like charity, he made it feel like family. On a warm afternoon in early May, Marcus stood alone at Earl's grave. The grass had grown back over the fresh dirt, and wild flowers had started to bloom around the headstone. He placed his Iron Brotherhood patch on the granite, just for a moment, the way he'd done 100 times before. "You were right, old man," Marcus said quietly. "Good people do circle back. And when they do, they bring others with them." He picked up the patch, tucked it back into his vest, and walked toward his bike. In town, Tommy was helping an elderly woman carry groceries to her car. She thanked him, tried to give him a few dollars, but he shook his head. "Just passing it on," he said. The woman smiled, confused but touched, and drove away. Tommy walked back toward the diner, the supporter patch visible on his jacket, his steps confident in a way they hadn't been 6 months ago. He wasn't the same scared kid who'd cleaned a dying man's bike out of kindness. He was something more now, someone who understood that the smallest act could change everything. On Route 9, 527 motorcycles moved in formation, heading north toward home. The sound rolled across the valley like distant thunder, a reminder that some things couldn't be silenced, that some people refused to look away when the world told them to. The sun climbed higher, burning through the clouds, and the roads stretched out ahead, endless and open. Somewhere in the distance, an engine roared to life, and the world kept turning. Sometimes the loudest message is delivered in silence, and sometimes the smallest act of kindness echoes for generations.